Why did a so-called homeless man drive off in a luxury car? Why was Shaq standing outside a gas station, arms crossed, watching it all unfold? The man had begged for money, claimed he hadn't eaten in days, but Shaq wasn't buying it. Cameras were rolling, and within minutes, the truth started unraveling. This wasn't just a scam, it was a con exposed on a global stage. And when Shaq gave the man a choice, jail or redemption, no one expected what happened next. Hey, real quick, before we get into this wild story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of his sleek black SUV, rolling his shoulders as he stretched his legs. It had been a long drive, and a quick stop for gas was all he needed before heading home. The gas station was nearly deserted, just a lone convenience store clerk inside, scrolling on his phone, and the distant hum of cars passing on the highway. The only sound nearby was the quiet flickering of a dying streetlight, buzzing like a mosquito in the night. Then, "Spare some change, big man." The voice was thin, shaky, almost desperate. Shaq turned, his massive frame casting a shadow under the flickering lights. A man in ragged clothes stood a few feet away, hands outstretched. His hoodie was faded and torn at the sleeves, his jeans stiff with dirt. He had the look of someone who'd been struggling for a long time, except something wasn't adding up. Shaq had been in enough situations to know when something felt off. He had seen true struggle, people down on their luck, sleeping outside in the cold, barely holding on. But there was something in this man's posture, the way he avoided direct eye contact, that made Shaq pause. The man exhaled deeply, shaking his head as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "I haven't eaten in days, sir." Shaq tilted his head slightly, studying him. The words sounded rehearsed, just a little too smooth. He'd heard genuine hunger before, the kind that cracked a person's voice, made them hesitant to even ask. But this guy? He didn't seem hungry. He seemed practiced. Still, Shaq wasn't the type to judge without reason. He reached into his pocket, fingers grazing over a crisp $20 bill. But just as he was about to hand it over, something caught his eye. The man's sneakers. They were spotless, not just clean, brand new, expensive, the kind that cost more than a full tank of gas. Shaq's hand stilled in his pocket. His eyes flicked back up. "You sure about that?" The man hesitated, just for a split second, before he nodded rapidly. "Yeah, man. Just trying to get by, you know? Anything helps." Shaq crossed his arms, his deep voice calm but firm. "How about I buy you a meal instead?" That was the test, and the man's face twitched. Barely, but enough for Shaq to see the cracks forming. Well, actually, cash would be better," the man stammered, scratching his arm as he shifted on his feet. Shaq smirked, tilting his head toward the brightly lit fast food place across the parking lot. "You sure? There's a McDonald's right there. I'll get you whatever you want." The man's fingers curled slightly. His eyes darted toward the restaurant, then back to Shaq. I got a condition, man. Can't eat fast food." Shaq let the silence stretch between them. Then he took a step back, his gaze sharpening. "That's funny, 'cause I've seen you outside that same McDonald's last week." The man's breath hitched. His body tensed. He had been caught. He knew it. Shaq folded his arms, his voice even. "Let me guess. You weren't homeless then either." For the first time, the man's confidence wavered. His eyes flickered around, as if searching for an escape. And Shaq? He just waited, because he already knew. This was about to get real interesting. Was this man truly in need, or was Shaq about to expose a scammer? The night had just begun, and the truth was about to come out. Shaq narrowed his eyes, letting the silence hang heavy between them. The man fidgeted under his gaze, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, scratching his arm in a nervous tick. Something wasn't right. His hoodie was torn, his jeans dirty. But those sneakers, pristine white, high-end, easily worth a few $100s. Shaq knew shoes. He had a collection worth millions, and those weren't the kind of shoes someone struggling to eat should be wearing. "Bless you, sir. Anything helps," the man mumbled again, his voice lower this time, almost as if he wanted to rush the conversation along. Shaq didn't move. Instead, he turned slightly, glancing toward his SUV. His assistant, seated in the passenger seat, caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. The camera on the dashboard was rolling. Good. Shaq wasn't looking to humiliate anyone. He wasn't a man who enjoyed tearing people down. But something about this situation didn't sit right, and he had learned long ago that when something felt off, it usually was. The man sniffled dramatically. I don't mean to bother you, big guy, just trying to survive out here, you know? Shaq tilted his head. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness behind it. That's so? The man nodded quickly. Yeah, man. Just need a little help. Shaq let out a low hum, as if considering. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. The man's eyes locked onto it instantly, his fingers twitching at his sides. Shaq watched him carefully, then smirked. Tell you what, how about I buy you a meal instead? The man stiffened. It was so subtle. Just a split second of hesitation. But Shaq caught it. The slight pause before the response. The flicker of panic that passed over his eyes. The man forced a cough, shifting again. Actually, cash would be better, you know? That way I can get something later. Shaq's smirk didn't fade. There's a McDonald's right across the lot. I'll buy you whatever you want. You name it. The man's hand twitched. I got a condition. Can't do fast food. Shaq crossed his arms. That right? The man nodded, a little too eagerly. Yeah, man. Messes with my stomach. Shaq inhaled deeply, taking a step back, his eyes never leaving the man's face. That's funny, he said slowly, 'cause I saw you outside that same McDonald's last week. The air changed. The man froze, his body tensed, like a deer caught in headlights. Shaq watched him closely, waiting for the reaction. And there it was, that tiny flicker of fear, a moment of realization that he'd been caught. Shaq raised an eyebrow. You weren't homeless then either, were you? The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape. Shaq just stood there, arms folded, watching as the man's entire act began to crumble. What was this guy hiding? And just how deep did the scam go? The man's face twitched, just for a second, before he quickly covered it up with a weak chuckle. Well, actually, cash would be better, he stammered, rubbing his hands together like he was cold, even though the night air was mild. Shaq smirked, not buying the act for a second. He nodded toward the glowing golden arches in the distance. You sure? There's a McDonald's right there. I'll get you whatever you want, my treat. The man hesitated. His hand went to his stomach as he let out a sudden exaggerated groan. I got a condition, man. Can't eat fast food. Messes me up real bad. Shaq raised an eyebrow. That's so? Yeah, the man nodded quickly. Doctor told me to stay away from that greasy stuff. He tried to sound convincing, but Shaq had seen too many people try to bluff their way through a lie. And this was a bad one. Shaq crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. That's funny, 'cause I saw you outside that same McDonald's last week. The air between them shifted instantly. The man's eyes darted around, scanning the parking lot like a trapped animal looking for an exit. His fingers twitched at his sides, his entire body suddenly rigid. Shaq took a slow step forward, his deep voice calm but firm. You remember that? 'Cause I do. You were leaning against the wall, eating a Big Mac. Looked like you were enjoying it too. I think you got me confused with someone else, the man sputtered, shaking his head. Shaq chuckled, shaking his own head. Nah, it was you. The man swallowed hard, glancing at the gas station entrance as if he was debating making a run for it. Shaq glanced toward his SUV again. His assistant was still there, still watching. The camera on the dashboard was still rolling. Look, man, Shaq continued, his voice even. You asked for help. I offered help. But now you're dodging simple questions. So tell me, what's really going on? The man's shoulders tensed. Nothing, man. I just need some help, that's all. Shaq exhaled, shaking his head slowly. Nah, man. Something ain't adding up. And I bet if we start asking around, we're going to find out exactly what it is. The man's breath hitched, and that was all the confirmation Shaq needed. Shaq took another step back, folding his massive arms over his chest. Let me guess, he said, his voice almost amused now. You weren't homeless then either, were you? The man's face twitched again. This time he didn't even try to hide it. What was this guy really hiding? And just how deep did the scam go? The man faked a cough, his body language shifting from nervous to defensive. His voice wavered. but he tried to keep his act together. "Why are you questioning me, man? I just need a little help." Shaq didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply shrugged, his massive frame casting a long shadow under the gas station's flickering lights. "Something ain't adding up," he said, his deep voice calm but unwavering. The man's jaw tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" Shaq tilted his head, eyeing the man's expensive sneakers. The way his hands were too clean for someone supposedly struggling on the streets. Before he could respond, a passing customer, a woman in her late 40s, holding a cup of gas station coffee, paused near them. She lowered her voice, but the words were loud enough to cut through the tension. "I've seen that guy before," she murmured, her eyes narrowing. "He drives a Lexus." The man's entire body stiffened. It was subtle, but Shaq caught it. The woman shook her head and walked off, but the damage was already done. The so-called homeless man forced a weak smile, though it was clear he was barely holding his composure together. I I don't know what she's talking about. I just need help, sir. Please." Shaq studied him for a long second, letting the silence stretch between them. The man's fingers twitched at his sides, his breathing a little quicker than before. Shaq had spent years reading people, on and off the court. This guy? He was cracking. "You sure?" Shaq finally asked, his tone casual but loaded with meaning. The man nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, man, I swear." Shaq let out a low chuckle. "All right, let me ask you something then." The man shifted uncomfortably. "What?" Shaq turned slightly, glancing toward his SUV. His assistant was still sitting inside, watching everything. The slight glow of a camera light reflected off the windshield. "You get that on camera?" Shaq asked, his voice calm but deliberate. The man's weak smile disappeared instantly. His eyes darted between Shaq and the SUV, realization sinking in. His entire demeanor changed. He wasn't playing the victim anymore. He was just caught. What would he do now that he knew he was being recorded? Would he run? Or was there an even bigger secret waiting to be uncovered? The man's fake tears dried up in an instant. His entire body went rigid. His voice, which had been trembling with practiced desperation just seconds ago, sharpened into something colder, more controlled. "Camera," he repeated, his gaze flickering toward Shaq's SUV, where the assistant sat, phone in hand, the tiny red recording light glowing in the dark. Shaq nodded, his face unreadable. "Yeah, we've been filming this whole thing." The man's mask slipped. Gone was the pitiful, trembling figure who had begged for help. His expression twisted with irritation, maybe even anger. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening like he was trying to hold something back. "Man," he muttered under his breath, "that's illegal." Shaq chuckled, crossing his arms. "Nah, but scamming people? That should be." The air between them grew heavy. The man's nostrils flared, his eyes darting left and right like he was calculating his next move. Then, from behind them, the gas station's front door swung open with a loud creak. "You again!" a gruff voice called out. The man froze. An older man, probably in his late 50s, wearing a grease-stained work shirt and a backward cap, stepped outside. The gas station owner. He wiped his hands on a rag, shaking his head in disbelief as he stomped toward them. "I told you not to pull this crap here anymore," the owner growled, pointing a calloused finger at the so-called homeless man. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so you know him," the owner scoffed. "Hell yeah, I know him. This guy's been standing outside my store for weeks hustling people out of cash. Told some lady his kid had cancer just 2 nights ago. And last week, he said his house burned down." Shaq turned back to the scammer, shaking his head. "Damn, man. You got a new sob story for every day of the week, huh?" The scammer's face was pale now. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He knew he was cornered. The gas station owner wasn't done. "And you know what the worst part is? I saw him leave last Tuesday. Drove off in a damn Lexus." A murmur rippled through the few late-night customers standing near the gas pumps. A woman with a stroller shook her head in disgust. Another guy in a hoodie let out a low whistle. "Wait, wait, wait!" the scammer suddenly blurted out, raising his hands. "Y'all got the wrong guy." Shaq smirked. "Oh yeah? Then why you sweating?" The man wiped at his forehead, his fingers trembling slightly. "Look, He cut himself off, his mind racing, desperately searching for an escape. But there was none. Not this time. A sharp voice cut through the tense silence. Wait a second. This guy asked me for money just yesterday. Everyone turned toward the speaker, a woman standing near the gas pump, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was tight with anger as she pointed at the scammer. Said he needed bus fare to get home to his sick mom. Shaq raised an eyebrow, watching as another voice joined in. He told me his wife had cancer, an older man in a flannel jacket muttered, shaking his head. Swore he just needed a few bucks to buy her medicine. The scammer's face was draining of color. His once confident stance was shrinking by the second. Another voice, this time from the gas station itself. A worker in a red uniform leaned against the doorway, smirking. Oh yeah, I saw him drive off in a sports car last week. Black Lexus. Looked real nice for someone begging for change. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, their whispers turning into a quiet storm of realization. People started connecting the dots. You mean to tell me this dude's been out here scamming folks all this time? A man in a hoodie scoffed. The scammer raised his hands, his voice a little too high-pitched. Y'all got me confused with someone else. His eyes darted around, his back inching toward the edge of the parking lot, toward escape. Shaq wasn't having it. He took a slow step forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the scammer. His voice was calm, steady, but there was a sharp edge underneath. So if we check security cameras, Shaq said, nodding toward the gas station owner, we won't see you leaving in a Lexus? The scammer swallowed hard. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd was closing in. He was out of excuses. Now everyone was watching, and there was nowhere left to run. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the gas station lights, buzzing faintly against the quiet night. The scammer stood there, his chest rising and falling, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool air. His eyes darted wildly from Shaq to the growing crowd, then to the parking lot. Then he ran. Without warning, he spun on his heel and sprinted toward the exit, his worn-down hoodie flapping behind him. His sneakers, suspiciously new for someone claiming homelessness, hit the pavement hard, the sound of his frantic footfalls echoing through the lot. A woman in the crowd let out a surprised gasp. Oh, come on, he's running? Really? Shaq didn't move, didn't even blink. He just watched, lips curling into an amused smirk. Wait for it, he murmured, his deep voice carrying through the night. The scammer's legs pumped furiously, his arms swinging. He was fast. Too fast for someone who had just been whining about being too weak and hungry to eat. His feet barely touched the ground as he raced toward the only way out of the gas station. Then suddenly, he stopped. Not by choice. Two security guards were already waiting at the exit, standing firm, arms crossed over their broad chests. Both were built like bouncers, eyes cold, unimpressed. One of them reached for his belt, where a radio crackled softly. Going somewhere? One of them asked, tilting his head. The scammer skidded to a stop so abruptly that he nearly tripped over his own feet. He let out a wheezing breath, stumbling back a step. His head whipped around wildly, searching for another way out. But there was none. He was trapped. The crowd had caught up now, closing in like sharks circling the kill. A few people pulled out their phones, cameras rolling. Shaq finally started moving, slow and deliberate. His massive frame cast a long shadow under the streetlights as he walked forward, hands still casually in his pockets. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The scammer swallowed hard, his back against the security guards. Shaq tilted his head. What happened, man? Thought you were too weak to move? Laughter rippled through the onlookers. A woman scoffed. Guess he's only slow when he's asking for money. The scammer licked his lips, breathing heavily. Wait, I can explain. His voice cracked with desperation. Shaq stopped just a few feet away, towering over him, his eyes locked onto the scammer's, unwavering. Go ahead, Shaq said, voice calm. We're all listening. The scammer hesitated, glancing around at the faces watching him. The weight of the cameras, the eyes, the entire situation crashing down on him. He knew there was no good excuse. Still, he tried. Man, y'all got it all wrong. His hands went up, shaking. I ain't doing nothing wrong. I was just what? Shaq interrupted. Running a scam? Stealing from real struggling people? The scammer's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was just trying to survive, man. A voice from the crowd cut through the tension. Then why'd you run? The scammer flinched. He had no answer. But at this point, no one was buying anything he had to say. The gas station manager adjusted his cap and pulled out a keyring, selecting a small silver key. With a sharp click, he unlocked the security system's terminal inside the store. The crowd gathered closer, their murmurs blending into the hum of the overhead lights. Let's see where you really went last night, the manager said, his voice tinged with suspicion. The scammer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the exit. But the security guards were still there, arms crossed, their faces unreadable. There was no way out of this. Shaq stood beside the counter, watching in silence as the manager pulled up the previous night's footage. The screen flickered, showing a grainy black and white view of the gas station lot. At first, there was nothing unusual, just cars pulling in, customers walking in and out. Then, at 11:42 p.m., a familiar figure appeared on the screen. The supposed homeless man. The crowd leaned in closer. The footage showed him pacing near the pumps, hands stuffed into his hoodie pocket, scanning the lot. Then, just as he had done tonight, he approached a customer, hands outstretched, pretending to be desperate. A woman gasped. That's me. On the screen, the woman hesitated before pulling out her wallet. She handed the man a 20. He took it with a dramatic bow of gratitude, then moments later, casually walked toward a parked car. A luxury Lexus. The gas station erupted. Are you kidding me? Someone yelled. No way! Dude got a better car than me? Another voice chimed in, laughter mixed with outrage as the video continued playing. The man unlocked the Lexus, climbed into the driver's seat, and sped off. No sign of struggle, no hesitation. The man in question froze, his face drained of color. Shaq arched a brow. That you? The scammer's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The gas station manager crossed his arms, shaking his head. You've been pulling this stunt for months. Customers told me, but I didn't have proof till now. He looked at the scammer with disgust. I should have banned you weeks ago. A younger man in the crowd let out a bitter laugh. Man, I gave you $50 last week. You said your daughter was sick. The scammer threw up his hands, backing away slightly. All right, he shouted over the noise. Y'all got me. The admission only made things worse. A woman scoffed. Wow, so you admit you're a scammer? The scammer's head jerked toward her. I had no choice. Y'all don't know what I've been through. Shaq took a step forward, towering over the man. His deep voice cut through the chatter. Oh, then explain. The scammer hesitated, licking his lips, his mind racing for an excuse. Any excuse. But there were too many eyes on him. Shaq folded his arms, expression unreadable. So, what now? The scammer looked around, but for the first time no one was falling for his act. A sharp screech of tires sliced through the tension. Heads turned as a news van rolled into the gas station lot, its headlights cutting through the dim glow of the flickering street lamps. The side door slid open, and a cameraman jumped out first, adjusting his lens. A reporter followed, microphone in hand, her expression sharp and eager. Somebody must have tipped them off, Shaq muttered under his breath, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The scammer stiffened. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but there was none. The crowd had grown. Strangers had pulled out their phones, recording from every angle. A few people whispered excitedly, recognizing Shaq, but their focus was locked on the man in the tattered clothes, the con artist who had finally been exposed. The reporter wasted no time. Sir, she called out, striding toward the scammer, we've been receiving reports about a man pretending to be homeless in this area. Is it true that you've been scamming people out of their hard-earned money? The scammer threw up his hands, his voice shaky but defiant. I was just trying to survive. Boo! The crowd erupted, voices full of anger. Survive? Man, you drive a Lexus, one person shouted. You lied to me, another woman snapped, shoving her phone forward. I gave you money because I thought you had kids to feed. The scammer's face twisted with desperation. He backed up toward the curb, waving his arms frantically. Y'all don't understand. I had to do what I had to do. The reporter stepped in closer, the microphone inches from his face. So you're admitting to scamming people? The scammer froze. Shaq let out a low chuckle. He took a slow step forward, towering over the man. Come on, man, he said, voice smooth but laced with sarcasm. Tell the nice lady the truth. How long you been pulling this stunt? The scammer swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His entire body language shifted. The false bravado was gone, replaced by sheer panic. He glanced at Shaq, then at the camera, then at the dozens of phones recording his humiliation. Y'all act like I'm some kind of criminal, he snapped, voice cracking. I ain't hurt nobody. Shaq raised an eyebrow. You stole from good people, he said simply. You played on their kindness. That ain't survival. That's greed. The scammer breathed heavily, looking around wildly, hoping for just one sympathetic face. But all he found were glares. A middle-aged man near the front of the crowd crossed his arms. Man, I work 2 jobs just to keep my family fed. You standing here dressed up like you struggling while you roll off in a damn luxury car? That ain't survival. That's a joke. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The scammer gritted his teeth, his fists clenched at his sides. He was cornered, completely exposed. The reality of the moment crashed down on him. And then, flash! A camera shutter clicked. The scammer turned just in time to see a reporter's photographer snapping pictures, his face full of shame and anger, frozen forever. Shaq's grin widened. He folded his arms and shook his head. Smile for the camera, bro. The scammer's jaw tightened. His breathing was ragged. He knew. His game was over. The internet moves fast. But this was on another level. It had only been a few hours since the gas station showdown, yet the footage had already exploded online. Clips were being shared across social media platforms at an unstoppable rate. Fake homeless man scams the wrong person. Shaq. The headline was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, even major news outlets had picked it up. People weren't just watching, they were reacting. The comments poured in by the thousands. This dude really tried to con Shaq? LMAO. Bro was playing on people's kindness while driving a luxury car? Nah, that's wild. I better not see this guy outside my Walmart ever again. Within minutes, the scammer had gone from being just another face in the crowd to the most hated man on the internet. His lies, his fake sob stories, his smug attitude. It was all out there for millions to see. And the worst part? The internet never forgets. As the video spread like wildfire, something incredible happened. At first, some viewers felt conflicted. They saw the scammer's act for what it was: manipulative, dishonest, disgusting. But at the same time, it raised a question. What about the real homeless people? Shaq was one step ahead. That same night, he took to Instagram Live, sitting comfortably in his car, his deep voice steady but serious. Listen, man, he started, looking straight into the camera. I ain't out here to embarrass nobody. But when you scam people, when you take from good folks who actually want to help, that's a problem. His eyes narrowed slightly. And I know there's real people out there struggling. For real. That's why I'm doing this. He turned his phone around, revealing a screenshot. A massive donation, $50,000, sent directly to multiple homeless shelters in the area. Y'all gave your money to the wrong guy, he said with a small smirk. So let's put it where it actually matters. The internet exploded again. Shaq just donated $50,000 to real homeless people. Now this is how you use influence. Let's keep it going. I just donated $20. Before the night was over, the donations skyrocketed. Money poured in, not for the scammer, but for the people he pretended to be. Within 24 hours, over $300,000 had been raised for struggling families, food banks, in shelters across the country. It was the ultimate twist. The scammer tried to take advantage of people's kindness and ended up helping more people than he ever intended. Meanwhile, the scammer was having the worst night of his life. His face was plastered everywhere. Memes, reaction videos, news reports. He was instantly recognizable. Panicked, he deleted all his social media accounts. He switched his phone off. He even tried changing his clothes before leaving the gas station. But it was no use. People knew. Someone recognized him at a nearby strip mall. Hey, yo! That's the dude from the video! A group of teens whipped out their phones, recording as he hurried past them, hood pulled low, trying to vanish into the crowd. The video hit Twitter in minutes. Breaking, the scammer from Shaq's video spotted running away. Bro thought he could hide. Too late. The internet had marked him. Back at the gas station, Shaq was wrapping up. The excitement was dying down, and the once hostile scammer was nowhere to be seen. But just as Shaq was about to get back into his SUV, a police officer approached. Tall built, with a badge reflecting in the station's harsh lights, the officer adjusted his belt and looked Shaq up and down. "Mr. O'Neal," he said, nodding in recognition. "I saw the video." Shaq smiled slightly. "Appreciate it, man. Crazy night, huh?" The officer didn't return the smile. "Yeah, and now we got a situation." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What kind of situation?" The officer sighed, pulling out a notepad. "The guy from your video? He's got a record. This ain't his first scam. We've had complaints before, but nothing solid. Tonight?" He nodded toward Shaq's SUV. "You gave us all the proof we need." Shaq's expression didn't change. He simply folded his arms. The officer cleared his throat. "So, here's the question. You want to press charges?" The air went still. For the first time that night, Shaq had a choice. And the internet? They were about to witness his decision. The officer's words hung in the air. "You want to press charges?" Shaq exhaled, rubbing his chin as he stared at the empty street beyond the gas station. The scammer, real name Derek Cole, had finally stopped running. He sat on the curb, head in his hands, breathing heavily. His entire world had collapsed in a single night. Shaq watched him for a moment before shaking his head. "Nah, I got a better idea." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "A fraud." "Charge sticks. He won't be pulling this again." Shaq smirked, folding his arms. "You throw him in jail, he'll just come out worse. I got something different in mind." Derek looked up, eyes filled with confusion and desperation. What you mean?" Shaq crouched down so they were at eye level. "You want to act homeless? Go help the people who really are." Derek blinked. "Huh?" "You heard me," Shaq said firmly. "I got connections. There's a homeless shelter a few blocks from here. They need hands, real hands. You go work there. You clean, serve meals, hear their stories. See what it's really like." Derek swallowed hard. "Man, you can't make me do that." Shaq grinned. "You got two choices, bro. Work the shelter or let the cops handle you." Derek's jaw clenched. His scam had backfired spectacularly, and now he had to decide. Swallow his pride or lose everything. After a long silence, he exhaled. "Fine." Shaq nodded. "Good choice." The very next morning, Derek stood outside the West Haven homeless shelter, staring at the faded brick building with a mix of dread and disbelief. This wasn't the life he was used to. He had spent years faking poverty, telling sob stories, tugging at heartstrings, manipulating strangers for cash. But now, he was about to see what real struggle looked like. Inside, a frail woman sat at a table, stirring a bowl of soup slowly, her eyes tired but kind. A young mother tried to soothe her crying toddler while nibbling on half a sandwich. In the corner, an elderly man wrapped in an oversized coat stared out the window, lost in thought. Derek's stomach twisted. These people weren't playing a role. They weren't running a hustle. They were just surviving. The shelter director, Miss Grayson, walked up and handed him an apron. "You're late," she said matter-of-factly. "Start with the dishes." Derek didn't argue. For the first time in his life, he had to earn his place. Later that night, Shaq posted one last message on Instagram. A picture of Derek, wearing his shelter apron, standing beside real volunteers. The caption? "Some people fake struggles. Others actually live them." The comments exploded. "This is better than jail. Make him see the damage he caused. Shaq out here changing lives, man. I bet dude never scams again." Derek had wanted easy money. Instead, he got a wake-up call. And whether he liked it or not, his real lesson had just begun. The room buzzed with conversation as Shaq made his way through the community event, shaking hands and exchanging smiles with local leaders and volunteers. A year had passed since that unforgettable night at the gas station, and in that time, the story had transformed from a scandal to an inspiration. Then out of the corner of his eye, Shaq saw a familiar face approaching. A man stood just a few feet away, clean-shaven, neatly dressed in a simple button-up and slacks, his posture hesitant yet composed. "Excuse me, Mr. O'Neal," the man said, his voice steady but uncertain. Shaq turned to face him fully. His eyes narrowed for a brief second before realization hit. It was Derek Cole. But he wasn't the same man who had once scammed people outside a gas station. Gone was the greasy hoodie, the nervous shifting, the fake desperation. This was someone different, someone who had changed. Shaq folded his arms, watching him closely. "Derek," Derek nodded. "Yeah, it's me." For a moment, there was silence. Then Derek cleared his throat, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. "I did my time at the shelter," he said, eyes flickering with something real. "And I actually learned something." Shaq didn't say anything. He just let Derek speak. "I saw things, man," Derek continued, his voice quieter now. "People who had nothing. People who would give their last piece of bread to someone hungrier than them. I met vets who couldn't get work, moms escaping bad situations, folks who just got dealt a bad hand." His voice caught slightly. He swallowed hard. "And the whole time I kept thinking, that wasn't me. I was just taking, stealing from people who actually needed help." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "So what now?" Derek exhaled, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small folded bill. "It's not much," he said, extending it toward Shaq, his hands shaking slightly. "But I want to give back, for real this time." Shaq glanced down at the bill. A $20 bill, a small gesture, but it meant everything. For a long moment, Shaq just stared at him. Then he smiled. Patting Derek on the shoulder, he took the bill and placed it into the donation jar nearby. "That's the first real thing you've ever done," he said. Derek let out a shaky laugh, looking relieved. "Yeah, it is." The story went viral again. But this time, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about redemption. Because at the end of the day, some people fake struggles. Some people learn from them, and it's never too late to change.